Number 10. Marrying a snake. Dawn Arguello, a 46-year-old woman from Texas, was volunteering for an inmate advocacy group when she met Nico Jenkins. Jenkins went on a killing spree in 2013 and killed 4 people and was sentenced to die. Jenkins had gone on an insane rampage for 8 long days across Nebraska, killing indiscriminately before he was finally apprehended. He's been described by a psychiatrist as a psychopath. He's a crazed killer who spent all of his life in and out of prison. Right before the shooting spree, he had just been released from jail for a separate crime spree involving carjackings. Despite Jenkins being a sadistic criminal, Dawn Arguello fell madly in love with him. The couple are now set to be married. She described her fiancé as a very sensitive man. She says he's highly intelligent and that he never really hurt a fly. At least, not again. She doesn't have a problem with his checkered past, nor the fact that he has now tattooed her name on his head. To be quite honest, Dawn might be a little crazy herself. Jenkins is a complete psycho. He sliced his tongue in half to make it look like he was a snake. He smeared his own blood on his cell walls. He also mutilated his own private part to make it look like a serpent. And finally, he has 666 carved into his forehead. But he's not the brightest tool in the shed. Obviously, Jenkins used a mirror, and the numbers came out inverted. Number 9. DOREEN LIOY and Richard Ramirez. Richard Ramirez was the Night Stalker, sentenced to death after convicted of a bizarre string of murders, robberies, and sexual assaults throughout Los Angeles and San Francisco. This was back in 1985. Richard is so famous that they've even just released a new Netflix documentary series about him. But the truth is always stranger than fiction, especially when it comes to DOREEN LIOY, the girl that married a truly disturbed individual. DOREEN was working as a freelance magazine editor when she first met Richard. According to the San Francisco Chronicle, she started sending him letters in 1985. This was shortly after he was arrested and while he was still waiting to be tried. She was struck by how vulnerable he appeared in TV reports. She had already been sending him letters, and now she started visiting him. Soon, she was showing up at the San Quentin State Prison 4 times a week. Things got bad for DOREEN at home after that. She became serious about her relationship with Richard Ramirez, and her friends disowned her. Her sister told the San Francisco Examiner in 1996 that she was upset to be linked to her sister. She hated being related by blood to somebody going out of their way to make a relationship with one of the worst people the city has ever seen. Nonetheless, the pair married in 1996. The service was 15 minutes long. The marriage itself lasted for 13 years, until in 2009, when something awful happened. Ramirez was linked by DNA to a terrible crime against a 9-year-old girl in 1984. After that, DOREEN bailed. Number 8. The Many Wives of Charles Manson. We all know who Charles Manson is. He was a master manipulator who influenced members of his so-called Manson family to commit murders in the late 1960s. Manson was described as irresistibly magnetic, extremely charismatic, and hard to argue with. It's no surprise that a man who was able to convince people to commit murder for him has been able to charm women into marrying him after incarceration. Charles Manson was first married to Rosalie Jean Willis. He was 20 and she was 15 when they tied the knot in 1955. They moved to Los Angeles. Manson was arrested for stealing a car, and Rosalie was pregnant. He was given 3 years in prison. While inside, Rosalie gave birth to Charles Manson Jr. She also divorced him before he could get out, later changing her son's name to Jay White. His second wife was Leona Stevens, married in 1959 and divorced in 1963. It's not surprising they split up. Manson had driven his wife and another woman to Mexico to pimp them out for money. They also had a child together, though we're not exactly sure where Charles Luther Manson is now. After Manson was locked up, he became engaged to Afton Elaine Burton in 2014. The pair obtained marriage licenses, with Burton being just 17 and Manson being 80. She started visiting him in 2007. The marriage was announced in 2014. How did she visit him in prison at 10 years old? But it never came to pass. It later came out that Burton had only wanted to marry Manson so that she could keep his corpse after he was dead and display it in a glass coffin for money. Number 7. The Wives of the Menendez Brothers. Lyle and Eric Menendez were given life in prison for murdering their parents back in August of 1989. Lyle was 21 and his brother was 18 when they opened fire on their parents. They went through 15 gunshot rounds, leaving their mother and father unrecognizable. And while this kind of thing may happen more frequently than we'd all like to admit, this particular incident gave heaps of attention. That's because it happened in Beverly Hills. Their parents were very wealthy, and nobody could figure out why the boys murdered them. The young men went on shopping sprees. They had a very privileged life. But things weren't so good on the inside. The brothers claimed that their father was abusive physically, while their mother was abusive mentally. They killed them because they felt they had to. The brothers did seem genuinely remorseful after the murders. Maybe that's why Playboy model Anna Erickson married Lyle in 1996, but divorced him when Lyle got busted writing letters to other women. Then Lyle got married a second time in 2003 to a woman named Rebecca Sneed. They've been married for 20 years. Eric's been married for over 20 years now to a woman named Tammy since 1999. Do you think it's healthy to be married to someone stuck in a jail cell for over 20 years? Let us know your thoughts on this bizarre case in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. Number 6. Married to a bad mortician. Mala Fuller was married to a man charged with a double murder and accused of abusing over 100 corpses at the hospital where he worked. Amazingly, Mala was his third wife. How someone who plays inappropriate games with dead bodies manages to get married 3 times is beyond me, but he did. David Fuller murdered Wendy Nell and Caroline Pierce in 1987 and got away with it for 3 decades. The only reason he was finally caught is that police looked back at the cold cases and used new advances in DNA testing. David was arrested in 2020 and officers went to his house to carry out a search. That was when they found the disturbing footage. He had recorded himself abusing corpses between 2008 and 2020. Nobody knows exactly how many dead people he defiled, but it could be anywhere from 100 to 500. Honestly, nobody knows. He's been working in hospitals since 1989. That's a lot of time alone near dead bodies. As for his wife, Mala lived with him for 20 years and 4 months. After he was arrested and charged, she moved out of the house, saying she now wants to live a life completely alone. It must be sickening to know that her husband was messing around with dead bodies, then going home and messing around with her. Number 5. Living with a killer. Paula Dietz woke up one morning and realized she was married to one of the most ruthless serial killers in American history. His name is Dennis Rader, and he is the BTK murderer. Dennis moved to Kansas in 1970 after a brief spell with the U.S. Air Force. He graduated from Wichita State University in 1979 and got a job installing security systems. This gave him a great excuse to access his victims' houses. After getting his dream job, he went on to murder 10 people. Paula lived with him the entire time and never even had a clue. Dennis murdered 4 members of the Otero family in 1974. He killed a girl named Shirlene that same year, and then 2 other girls in 1977. Then he went dark until 1985. Once he started up again, he kept killing until 1991. He was caught just shy of 15 years later in 2005 because of letters he'd sent to the media telling them about the murders. After Dennis was caught, he pleaded guilty to every murder and was sentenced to 175 years. He was named the BTK murderer because of the words in the letters he sent to the media: bind, torture, kill. Paula claimed she had no idea that he was murdering people in his spare time. Immediately after he was captured, she filed for divorce. He was granted by a judge the same day, and she left Kansas soon after. Paula hasn't been seen again. She never gave a single public statement. No photos of her can be found on the internet. And she has never visited her ex-husband in prison. If you ask me, she really didn't know she married a monster. Number 4. Rock and roll and murder. Varg Vikernes became a big deal in the 1990s when he was convicted of manslaughter. He stabbed his fellow band member to death and then committed arson attacks on a trio of churches. His stage name was Count Grishnik, and he's played in a handful of extreme metal bands. He was given 21 years in prison for manslaughter and arson, but was released in 2009. He served only 16 years. Before he was released, Marie Katchett was just graduating from high school. She got a hold of Varg, the pair hit it off, and she gave birth to their son before he had even gotten out of jail. In Norway, the rules are a bit more relaxed about what you're allowed to do while locked up. The family lived in Norway for a bit, then moved to France. Marie and Varg had 6 children together, schooling the kids at home. They've actually gotten pretty wealthy by posting pagan-themed videos online and selling books. Number 3. The Beast of Ukraine's Wife. Serhiy Tkach attended the funeral of a friend's deceased daughter in 2005. The young girl was only 9 years old when she was abducted and strangled to death. Going to the funeral turned out to be a pretty bad move for Serhiy, as he was the one who murdered her. Some of the girl's friends were at the funeral. They recognized Serhiy as the creepy guy who was talking to the girl just before she vanished. He realized something was wrong when people at the funeral began staring at him and whispering. He took off for his life, but was arrested by the cops later that same day. It's now believed he killed at least 100 young girls and women throughout Ukraine. It was a killing spree that lasted for approximately 25 years, from 1980 to 2005. After the sick monster was arrested, a teenage girl named Alina saw him on TV and immediately became interested. She started writing to Serhiy, and they became pen pals. They ended up getting married in 2015. They had a baby in the prison, and Alina stopped her visits in 2018. She also deleted all her social media, so nobody knows what happened to her. To be honest, chances are she was a confused teen who saw a psycho and reached out for attention. But once she actually had his baby and became something of an adult, she realized she had made a huge mistake. Luckily for her, Serhiy had a heart attack and died a few months later after her last visit. Number 2. Carole Hoff in the Stench of Dead Rats. Carole Hoff was the high school sweetheart of John Wayne Gacy. They were married for 4 years while Gacy was murdering and mutilating young men in his spare time. In the very house they lived in together. She never learned about the murders until after they had already gotten divorced in 1976. Let's go back to the beginning. The couple met when Gacy was only 16. They went their separate ways and then met again as adults. Gacy was a relatively successful man who ran a business and owned his own home. Carole was financially bankrupt and a single mom. Since Gacy also spent his spare time as a clown entertaining kids, he really seemed like a catch. They got married in 1972, with Carole not knowing Gacy had already killed a boy of 16 and stuffed his body into their crawl space. What Carole also didn't know was that before she reunited with Gacy, he's been given a 10-year conviction. He'd been divorced, and he had just gotten out of prison on good behavior. He's been convicted for hiring teenage boys to help with his housework, only to sexually assault them. And yet Carole knew none of this. Then for 4 years they were together. She ignored the horrible stench of dead rats constantly wafting up through the floorboards. Gacy said it was a leaky sewer pipe, and she always believed him. It's honestly hard to say if she was willingly ignorant, or if she knew something terrible was going on, or if she was really just that blind. Carole eventually had enough and got a divorce in 1976. When she was out of the house, Gacy really went crazy with the murdering. He killed dozens more before finally being caught in 1978. Gacy was killed by lethal injection on May 10, 1994. And number 1, settling down with a killer. In 1990, Sheila Keene put white face paint on, an orange wig, and killed the wife of her secret lover. Her victim was Marilyn Warren, whose last few seconds alive were spent wondering why there was a clown standing in front of her. Marlene was standing in the doorway of her house with a clown on her front stoop presenting flowers and balloons. Before she realized what was happening, a gun had replaced the flowers and a bullet went straight through her face. Sheila, still dressed like a clown, fled in a vehicle and vanished. The vehicle was found a few days later, but Sheila was gone. The police suspected Sheila from the very beginning, but never had the evidence to convict her of the crime. The motive was clear enough, though. Sheila was having an affair with Marlene's husband, Michael. Sheila wanted Michael all to herself. This isn't so much a case of a woman dating a bad boy, but of a man unintentionally dating the woman who killed his wife. 27 years after the crime, police finally arrested Sheila in 2017. She was still living with Michael Warren, but because of time and the pandemic, Sheila is still waiting for a trial in 2022. Do you think you could ever be married to a serial killer monster and not know it? Let us know in the comments, and thanks for watching. For the best true crime on the internet, check out more videos from the channel. We'll see you next time.